By the late 1990s, Pokemon was a global sensation, captivating fans with its tagline, "Gotta catch 'em all." But in 1999, a new kind of Pokemon adventure invited players to catch them in a way they'd never had before. Not with Poké Balls, but with a camera. Pokemon Snap wasn't about battling or training, it was about observation, exploration, and creativity. Developed by HAL Laboratory and published for the Nintendo 64, Pokemon Snap sent players on a safari-like adventure through stunning environments teeming with wild Pokemon. Armed with nothing but a camera and a keen eye, players captured their favorite creatures in their natural habitats, creating a peaceful yet deeply engaging experience. It was a game that celebrated the joy of discovery and gave fans a new perspective on the world of Pokemon. Today, we're zooming in on the history of Pokemon Snap, its innovative gameplay, and its legacy as one of the more unique entries in the Pokemon franchise. So grab your camera, hop in the 01, and join us for today's picturesque trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 238th episode of our video game history podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people who have created it. It can be about a console or the technology that brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video games a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're taking a scenic ride through Pokemon Snap, released in 1999. This unique spin on the Pokemon series challenged players to capture the world's favorite creatures on film. With its charming gameplay and innovative use of Nintendo 64 hardware, it has become kind of a, I'd say, cult favorite, fan favorite amongst Pokemon fans. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who'd probably end up with blurry photos and then claim that they're artistic. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, do you think that you would have luck capturing a rare Pokemon, or are you more likely to accidentally snap your thumb in the camera frame?
Both actually.
Yeah,
I'm gonna get that shot, but my thumb's still gonna be there, so it's gonna be pretty bad.
but you got the Pokemon.
Yeah, but you can't really tell what it is because the thumb's it's like 3/4 thumb. But that's the problem. That's why you don't use your phone for taking good pictures. You got to have a nice camera. Your
Uh,
thumb's a little harder to get in front of a long lens.
you have a nice camera in Pokemon Snap.
Well, yeah, that's why I don't have my thumbs in those pictures.
In Pokemon Snap, there really weren't cell phone cameras when this came out.
No, there weren't.
There weren't.
Not for the
No,
original. Not for the
not
original Snap.
not the original Snap. True statement. Not the original. Well, we we have a photography video game to talk about, certainly, and a Pokemon game. You love Pokemon.
I do.
Before we get into that, why don't you tell our listeners what else has happened during the current week in gaming history?
Well, kicking it off on March 22nd, 1996, Resident Evil was released, pioneering the survival horror genre and setting the standard for atmospheric, tension-filled gameplay. Developed by Capcom and directed by Shinji Mikami, the game followed STARS operative Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine as they investigated a mysterious mansion overrun with zombies and monstrous bioorganic weapons. With its fixed camera angles, resource management, and puzzle solving elements, Resident Evil created a sense of dread that kept players on edge. Its groundbreaking approach to horror, combined with its cinematic storytelling and B movie charm, made it a massive success, leading to one of the most influential and enduring franchises in gaming history.
Rob, how long ago would you say we did an episode on the original Resident Evil?
2 years.
Longer.
Oh, it was 3 years. Wow.
Longer.
What?
4 years.
No kidding.
It was episode 30.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy?
That's wild. I didn't
That
realize it was so
seems
early on.
this I know exactly the point. Exactly. I didn't realize it was so early on too. Man, we had some good episodes there. We did Journey, Descent, Resident Evil, and Space War that month. That's and Ninja Gaiden. That's a good time. We were
Yeah,
knocking
back when
them
I used to
out.
make sure to play the games.
We were Yeah, very true. We were knocking them out. We were knocking them out. Some good topics early.
Indeed, we
All right,
were.
what else? What else you got?
Well, next up, on March 20th, 1997, Castlevania Symphony of the Night was released in Japan, redefining the franchise and setting a new standard for action adventure games. Developed by Konami and directed by Koji Itagashi, the game broke from the series' linear roots, introducing a sprawling, non linear castle to explore, deep RPG mechanics, and a more narrative driven experience. Players took control of Alucard, the son of Dracula. Crazy, if you read his name backwards, it's almost like it says Dracula. What?
What?
As he ventured through the castle to uncover its secrets and battle an array of supernatural foes. Though initially overlooked commercially, Symphony of the Night grew into a beloved classic, heavily influencing the Metroidvania subgenre and shaping the future of 2D exploration based platformers.
We covered that one on my birthday 3 years ago.
Indeed, because that was when it was released in America.
It was released in America, and it's also still one of my favorite games of all time. So,
Yeah, it's one of the games of all time. Absolutely.
yes, one of the games of all time.
Indeed.
All right, what else you got?
Next up, on March 21st, 2001, Nintendo released the Game Boy Advance, the next evolution in its line of handheld gaming consoles for the time.
Yes.
Featuring a 32-bit processor, a wider, more ergonomic design, and backward compatibility with Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, the GBA offered a significant upgrade in power and capability. The system launched with an impressive lineup, including Super Mario Advance, F Zero Maximum Velocity, and Castlevania Circle of the Moon, showcasing its vibrant graphics and improved gameplay experiences. The Game Boy Advance went on to become one of Nintendo's most successful handhelds, selling over 81 million units worldwide and cementing its place in gaming history.
Yes, indeedy it did. I never owned a Game Boy Advance. Did you?
I did. I had several of them.
Oh, did you now?
Yeah, I had an original purple solid, I want to say, or it was like the blue, dark blue is purple solid, and then I also had one that was the clear plastic purple, so you could like see through it.
Yeah,
So
I missed that era. Well, that would have been yeah, that would have been my
yeah,
last.
I had that. I never got the advanced SP, so I had my Game Boy Advances up until the DS, and I didn't get the DS till the DS Lite. So
Gotcha.
Um, yeah, so
I
that GBA held me a long time for handheld consoles.
I really didn't play handheld in between the original Game Boy and let's say the DS because all the advances and SPs and minis and micros and I didn't own a single one of those other Game Boys. So
No, they
oops.
were nice, but the old good old faithful. Next up, on March 22nd, 2005, God of War was released for the PS2, introducing players to the brutal and cinematic journey of Kratos, a Spartan warrior seeking revenge against the gods of Olympus. Developed by Santa Monica Studio and directed by David Jaffe, the game combined hack and slash combat, puzzle solving, and platforming with a rich narrative inspired by Greek mythology. Featuring the iconic Blades of Chaos, epic boss battles, and a gripping storyline, God of War set a new standard for action adventure games. Its success led to a critically acclaimed franchise that redefined storytelling and combat mechanics in gaming.
We covered that with Damon.
Indeed, I remember covering it. Just didn't remember Damon being there, so good on you for that.
I had to look it up. Episode 134.
Yeah, definitely remember
Yeah.
that. It was interesting because I'd never played those because they're PlayStation exclusives. Damn it!
Ugh, I love the God of War series. I mean, the whole series, except I still haven't played Ragnarok, but it's on my to do list. So,
Well, you better get to it. And on the topic of games that we love to play, our last topic for today on March 17th, 2015, Battlefield Hardlines was released, marking a significant departure from the traditional military warfare of the Battlefield series. Developed by Visceral Games and published by Electronic Arts, the game shifted the focus from large scale military battles to a cops and robbers theme, with players engaging in high stake heists, police raids, and car chases. The single player campaign followed Detective Nick Mendoza as he navigated a web of corruption within law enforcement, offering a more narrative driven experience than its predecessors. Despite some criticism for its departure from Battlefield's core identity, Hardline was praised for its fast paced multiplayer, new game modes like Heist and Hotwire, and its attempt to bring fresh ideas to the franchise.
was it good?
I did enjoy it, yes. It was definitely a difference from the normal style of play. It took some getting used to, but I thought the story was fantastic. I really enjoyed playing through it. And the multiplayer at the time, it was still Battlefield. A
Did
little
it
different,
actually?
but it was still played the same.
Did it actually have car chases?
Oh, absolutely. I don't
That's
remember so much on the online. I feel like definitely people would chase you around. I feel like there was a mode on online where like you would be in the map and like people would chase. Like it was all car based.
yeah.
Maybe that's just because there was so much running around. I didn't feel like walking.
Hmm. That's I can't wrap my head around. I can't. I never played it, so I can't wrap my head around it at all.
Oh, it was a great one. I really enjoyed it. Probably wouldn't hold up as well now, but definitely was a fun concept for the time.
Gotcha. Understandable. Well, Rob, our story today, we're going to head back to 1995 before the Nintendo
Me.
64. Yeah, before you. Now, by the time our story starts, you were already of this earth. Not by long, but you're already in this earth. But back in 95, Nintendo had they were working on the release of the Nintendo 64. And even before the Nintendo 64 was a thing, they were announcing games and, in our case for today, a peripheral, an add on designed to expand the capabilities of the Nintendo 64. And that is called the Nintendo 64 DD. Now, we've done a whole episode on the story of the 64DD where we learned about how it came about and we learned all about its library, which was a whopping 10 games. Not a very big discussion. But I thought I would briefly cover it again today because it's kind of part of our story today. The Nintendo 64DD was stood for the 64 disk drive or 64 dynamic drive, depending on who you ask, and it was a magnetic disc peripheral that was an add-on for the Nintendo 64. You know, aside from adding a different storage medium in terms of they were kind of like zip disks. I think I used that before, and you said, "What's a zip disk?" They're giant floppies, basically.
Yeah, I don't know if I said that unless I was really young.
Maybe
Maybe.
you know what a zip disk is now.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, someone doesn't know what a zip disk is out there. Zip disk is like a hard floppy disk but bigger and more storage. Not only did the Nintendo 64 DD add more storage, but it also added a real-time clock for persistent game world design, and it had a built-in font and audio library that basically the concept was if these standard assets were stored on the console itself, they wouldn't have to take up space on the games. And so the thought was, we're just going to shove them in here so there's more storage to do more game stuff.
Nice.
Aside from this, the 64DD could also connect to the internet. It had a dedicated online service, which was called RANDnet. And RANDnet had an online store. RANDnet had the ability to do online gaming. RANDnet also allowed media sharing, through his whatchamacallits. Now, Nintendo saw the 64DD as a peripheral that would, they called it enabling technology. It was going to be a peripheral that was going to allow them to evolve, that was going to allow developers to create new genres of music, new genres of video games, wrong podcast apparently, new genres of video games, new genres of applications. They were going to use these elements basically to evolve video games. That's typical Nintendo, right? That's what they do.
Oh
That's
yeah,
that's
definitely.
that's what they at least advertise to do. How about we go with that? The reality of the Nintendo 64DD, realistically, is that the history of it is very, very, very much like the Nintendo Famicom Disk System. The Famicom Disk System was Nintendo, the original Nintendo, like Nintendo Entertainment System, but the Japanese version, the Famicom. That was a disc add on for the Famicom as well. And same concept. When the cost of cartridges was incredibly high, their thought was to use a less expensive storage medium, discs, floppy disks in both cases, that were a much more cost effective storage medium. And aside from that, floppy disks could be rewritten. They weren't one time right. So it presented itself with a really fascinating concept of, in the case of the original Famicom disk system, you could save your games, which was not a concept before the FDS came out. So they wanted to be able to add these features, and they wanted to be able to build larger games more cost effectively. But the 64DD and the FDS, the disk system, both have similar circumstances. By the time the peripherals were released, the cost of manufacturing storage had come down. So it was more technologically feasible and less expensive to create cartridges that had a similar storage capacity to the peripherals in time. The disk system had an advantage at first and then lost it, but the 64DD languished in development for so long that by the time it came out, there was no advantage whatsoever. It lost the storage advantage. The only real draw to it was all the other stuff they could do with it realistically. And that's a point worth looking into because storage wasn't the only, point of innovation on the system. Video game developers were hoping to take some of those other features in order to and utilize them to do creative things, like the real-time clock system, for instance. We had never seen, I believe, a real-time clock before in a console, and they were hoping to do with it things that would evolve entire gaming genres. Now, we talked previously about one such game that was created with this in mind, and it's a game called Cabbage. And Cabbage is the team behind it, rather, is an absolute powerhouse of talent. It has the makers of the Mother series, Itoy. It has Ishihara, the Pokemon series. It's got Mario and Zelda, which is Miyamoto. The eventual president of Nintendo, Satoru Iwata, was a part of this team. The team that were making games for the 64DD, just an absolute, the experience, the innovation, the likes of which aren't together very often. And so Cabbage was created in this think tank environment, And it was basically a virtual pet game. It was a game where you were going to be able to raise, feed, and carry around a creature called a cabbage. And utilizing the real time clock that was built into the 64DD, your cabbage would continue to grow even when you weren't playing the game. Now, we don't know anything else about cabbage. Um, it no video exists, no screenshots exist. We don't even know if the cabbage was actually a cabbage. Like, we literally don't know anything aside from what we're talking about today. Cabbage was a game that languished in development hell, so to speak. I think between 3 and 5 years throughout this process, and it languished in development until it became obvious that the 64DD was going to be a commercial failure. That didn't take long. I think from release to the end, it was only around for 18 months, was it? It wasn't very long at all. December of 1999 to February of 2001. So not very long at all. So
No,
what's that?
definitely not.
2 years?
About that.
Uh, so by the time they got to a point in which they realized that the 64DD was not going to amount to anything, and at that point you move on, right? All these games that you have in development for this peripheral that isn't selling, there's no point in continuing to develop for said peripheral. What's most important about the 64DD is the legacy that this think tank environment left for future gaming development. So the concepts of cabbage obviously never existed in cabbage, but they were used in other games. So the concept of a virtual pet, the carrying of another creature, that became the basis of Nintendogs. And their idea to use real-time clock features to build a persistent game world became the staple of the Animal Crossing series. And there were, a ton of other games for the Nintendo 64DD that just, when it became obvious that it was not going to amount to anything, like I said, the storage by that time had become cost effective. And so they just kind of moved a ton of them over to the Nintendo 64 in cartridge form. Games that necessarily didn't utilize the extra features. Like, for instance, Paper Mario existed on the 64DD as Super Mario RPG 2. And, they were building Resident Evil 0 for the 64DD, and it eventually got released on the GameCube. Uh, what else? There's other games too. Zelda 64. Zelda 64, like the original Zelda, was originally in development for the disc drive on the Nintendo 64. And again, became obvious it was going to not amount to anything, so that became Ocarina of Time on the N64. So a lot of games, they just kind of moved over. And otherwise, there were gaming concepts that were just used to create other games, right?
Yeah.
With that being said, there was another game that was looking to take advantage of some of these features. And that was a game that was tentatively named Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and the Beanstalk started out in development by HAL Laboratory. We know HAL, we've talked about it many times before. They are known for games such as Smash Brothers. They are heavily involved in the Kirby series. We did a whole episode on Earthbound, which came out of that development studio. But at this time, they were working on various projects for the Nintendo 64DD because they were intimately intertwined with Nintendo, have been for a long time. And that development team, because of the nature of what they were working on, earned the nickname Jack and Beans. And obviously, based on its name, we can deduce that this game was going to be based around the English fairy tale of Jack and the Beanstalk.
What? No way.
Crazy, right? Absolutely crazy. I thought Jack and Beans was a nickname for a can of pork and beans, but go me. So, just like cabbage where we know very, very little about the game and mini games that were that they had in quote unquote development for the 64DD. We don't really know much about Jack and the Beanstalk. Nobody actually saw Jack and the Beanstalk. It was announced at about the same time as the 64DD, along with a bunch of these other games. No screenshots or videos have ever surfaced from it, which is crazy to think about because we've had so many leaks, for other games and game systems, but a lot of the 64DD stuff is just kind of gone. It's a black hole. We do know a little bit because people have talked about it. There was an art designer who would eventually work on some of the other, games we just talked about, who happened to mention that he was part of a conversation that the game was going to feature seeds that would grow in real time utilizing the DD's real time clock, right?
Right.
And we also know that, thanks to our topic today, that some of the gameplay that was developed for Jack and the Beanstalk, including having players take photos. This was a lot of the gameplay loop that the game was designed upon. I, again, don't know much about it. I'm assuming the seeds would grow, and as they grow, you got to explore a fairy tale world, and the concept was to take pictures of it. That's all I can put together. But realistically, we don't know. We don't know. This team is working on it and working on it and working on it, and after some time, we know this through interviews with Jack and Beans because they were a lot of prominent features. They got to a point where they asked themselves, does taking pictures really make a game? And when that question was asked at that point, which was not too long into development, maybe a year, I'm sorry, 6 months to a year is the best I could deduce. The answer was no. Taking pictures is one thing, but taking pictures without any purpose is another. And they really just had a game, a concept, and a gameplay mechanic. And purpose is what the team was looking for. Purpose, after so many months of development, was something that they would need to refine the idea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Jack and the Beanstalk was announced with the 64DD in February of 1995. And it was exactly a year later, in February of 1996, that Pocket Monsters Red and Green, also known as Pokemon Red and Blue to us North American peons, was released, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Pokemon is now, I think, the highest grossing franchise in the entire world. So it's safe to say that Pocket Monsters was a successful game.
Yeah, definitely was.
People were going crazy for Pokemon. February of 96, we get Pocket Monsters, which is the Japanese release, and the trading card game follows in October of 1996. In between there are some magazines that pick it up, and that's kind of when it starts to pick up steam through these magazines that have various features on it. And I believe one had, was it a sweepstakes or a giveaway or something along those lines, but it was a successful campaign in it. So it starts to pick up. And that leads to a trading card game in October of 1996, which admittedly was, we're only a year or 2 years into Magic the Gathering, so they really took Magic the Gathering as a basis and simplified it. Fun little fact if you didn't know that.
Did not.
And so October of 96, we get the trading card game, and then the anime, it comes out like the month they start talking about the anime, or the month before they start talking about the anime. So we get the Pokemon anime starting in April of 1997. So this is like peak Pokemon time, right? This is when the lore is being created and people are like begging for more, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is all happening as the 64DD is going through its, rise and fall, so to speak. So the Jack and the Beans team is working on developing something new for the 64DD, and they're also watching, like everyone else, Pokemon Mania sweep over the nation, right? And at some point, because as we know, the Pocket Monsters was released on the Game Boy, and Nintendo was the original steward of Pokemon. In fact, they were the original like advertising representative. So when Pokemon started to like become a trading card game anime, Nintendo was the contractual party that like negotiated the licenses. And it was the popularity of the anime that actually basically said, "Hey, we need to create like a company." First it was a council and then it became a company, so to speak. So this is like I said, height of Pokemon time. So Nintendo is the steward of the Pokemon name. Pokemon is increasing in popularity. If there's anything we know about Nintendo through the years, it's that they love money, right?
Definitely.
Nintendo prints money. That's the meme.
100%.
And so the idea came to this team, or was brought to this team rather, to integrate Pokemon into their project. And it's like a light switch got turned on for the team because up until this time they just had a gameplay mechanic around a rough concept with no focus whatsoever. But in that suggestion, that team found the focus they were looking for. It was no longer going to be a game where you took pictures, I don't know, of beanstalks. It was going to be a game in which you took photos of Pokemon. I gotta tell you, we do know that not everyone was in love with the concept at first. They had put some time and effort into Jack and the Beanstalk, and so there were some people in the character design and art departments that were not happy to see all the work scrapped. Right?
Right.
No one wants their work go to waste.
No,
Uh,
definitely not.
I bet the programmers were probably over the moon, right? Because the gameplay mechanics weren't going away.
Right. Yeah, but the other people.
At one point in this story, Satoru Iwata was asked about the process of our topic today, Pokemon Snap, and he said originally Pokemon Snap for the Nintendo 64 wasn't a Pokemon game, but rather a normal game in which you took photos. But the motivation for playing the game wasn't very clear. We wondered what players would enjoy taking pictures of, and later on, we made a somewhat forced switch to taking pictures of Pokemon. So the project carried on as a Pokemon photography project on the 64 Dynamic Drive, the DD, as the team worked on bringing the type of innovation that they hoped would come out of the 64 DD to this game on the platform itself, right? They talked the talk, they wanted to walk the walk. So there were features that they all threw around. We don't know terribly many of them, but one interesting concept that comes into play. At one point, they considered giving players the ability to transfer their photos over to the Game Boy camera using the transfer pack.
Hmm.
And that was so that they could use the Game Boy printer to print photos. Did you ever have the Game Boy printer?
I did not have one,
Did
no.
you know someone who had it?
No, I did not know anyone either. It
Interesting.
was not a big thing that I saw.
No, it was not a big thing. And there's a reason why. If you know the Game Boy printer, you know that its quality was questionable. I mean, it was fun for its time, but it was a super small black and white. I think it was a dot matrix printer. I don't remember exactly. Don't quote me on that because I didn't own one and I didn't research it. So someone's going to roast me. The thing of it is, when you shrink Pokemon down, and in particular, you take away the color. You kind of take away some of what made the Pokemon in this game in particular interesting, if that makes sense. And so that idea was eventually scrapped. Uh, I wouldn't say scrapped. It lived on in a different form, actually, which we'll talk about shortly. But like many other games in development for the Nintendo 64 DD, the development of what was now Pokemon Snap really languished longer than most of the developers cared for. Realistically, at this point, the team didn't need the real time clock because all the features related to it were no longer needed. And As we already talked about briefly, the cost of storage had come down, so large capacity cartridges could be manufactured cost effectively. So, like all the other games that we talked about on the 64DD, Ocarina of Time and Paper Mario, and so on and so forth, when it was obvious that the platform just wasn't going anywhere, they made the decision to release Pokemon Snap as a cartridge on the Nintendo 64 itself. And that happened in Japan on March 21st, 1999. Rob, hearing about how Pokemon Snap started as a different game, completely different game, and then became a Pokemon title after the team struggled to find its purpose, that really makes me think about how creative projects evolve over time.
Yeah, it's wild to think that it was originally just about taking photos, and only later did they realize Pokemon was the perfect subject. Sometimes the best ideas come from unexpected places.
Yeah, exactly. And if you've ever had an idea that you wanted to share, whether it's about video games or storytelling, Pokemon, or anything else, podcasting is a great way to do it. And thanks to Zencaster, starting a podcast has never been easier.
All right, I'm listening. What makes Zencaster stand out?
Well, Zencaster is an all in one podcasting platform that lets you record high quality audio and video straight from your browser. There's no need for fancy setups or expensive gear. Just log in, hit record, and start sharing your voice.
That sounds great, but what about editing? That's usually the part that trips up people.
Well, that's where Zencaster really shines. Their post production tools automatically clean up your audio, balance sound levels, and even remove background noise and filler words like or It's like having your own personal audio engineer.
All right, but once I've got the great episode, how do I get it out there?
Well, Zencaster makes distribution effortless. You can send your podcast straight to major platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or more, all from one place. There are no extra steps and no headaches.
That's awesome. So, how can our listeners get started?
That's easy. Head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code MemoryCardLane. You'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencaster paid plan. Whether you're starting fresh or looking to take your podcast to the next level, Zencaster has the tools to make you sound like a pro.
That's a fantastic deal. So, listeners, if you've ever wanted to start a podcast, whether about Pokemon, gaming history, or anything else, Zencaster is the way to go.
Absolutely. Head over to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code, all one word, MemoryCardLane, and start your podcasting journey today.
And with that, let's get back to Pokemon Snap and how unique of a game it really is.
Rob, I think for non Pokemon fans, it's really hard to wrap your head around Pokemon Snap, right?
I think even for Pokemon fans, it is.
That was kind of my question. It's just a game, and when you take pictures of Pokemon, I mean, like, what gives?
I don't really know. I think that it's one of those ones I don't feel has a lot of replayability. You go through the things, you take your pictures. I guess if you're like a perfectionist and like I don't really remember how the scoring worked in the game all that well. It's been so long since I've played. Um, but I mean, I think the cool aspect of it for the time was, you got to see all of these Pokemon in these different environments, and yeah, you had to take pictures of them. You could take pictures of them, but it was just kind of cool to see them in more of a natural environment. Because when you see it in the shows or in the other Pokemon games, it's always a different aspect. You're seeing obviously from the other games perspective, with the exception of Stadium at the time, and Hey You Pikachu, it was always kind of that 2D top-down view. You see the anime, and again, it's following more Ash and Pikachu and Misty and Brock and all of the friends and everything starting out from the beginning, but it's not really showing the Pokemon in their natural habitat so much. It's more they go in there and then, hey, we came, we did our thing, you leave. They're not seeing them like, oh, well, you're in a volcano and now you can see all of the Ponyta Rapidash that are around that area. Or something like that. I think it was just kind of cool to get that look in a different style.
It's funny that you brought up Stadium and Hey You Pikachu. Stadium came a little bit after, but Hey You Pikachu came a little bit before, and I had completely forgot that was ever a game in any way, shape, or form until I looked up, you know, Pokemon releases for this episode.
Oh yeah, no, that it came with the microphone that you used to be able to talk to
Mhm.
Pikachu, and there was actually, if I remember correctly, there was a Hey You Pikachu edition N64 that came with the game, but it was a Pokemon. It was Pikachu themed, so it was like a yellow with Pikachu's face on it. And I think the controller was yellow as well.
Yeah, yep, for sure. I think I think it's important to talk about the fact for those of you who don't have any concept of this game, the fact that and Rob brought up a lot of good facts, but I think it's important to know there was a gameplay loop built in this game. It wasn't just load the game up, pick a place, and take a picture and call it a day. He's right. You got scores for taking pictures, and I think it was based on things like focus and framing and stuff like that. But as you took more pictures, you could gain more equipment, right?
Right.
There were accessories that you could gain in time. You could get food that would help you attract Pokemon. You got these things called pester balls that would flush them out of hiding places. You could upgrade the motor on your vehicle that would allow you to get to more places, like the volcano that Rob was talking about, or sneak up on faster Pokemon, if I understand correctly. Um, they had these things that, as you upgraded your equipment, you had to revisit the places that you've already been because they presented new opportunities. There were Pokemon you wouldn't be able to see until you could throw a pester ball at a bush. I'm guessing, probably, right? That's
Ah,
kind of that kind of thing. It's probably like that kind of thing. So, um, but I think it's important to talk about context. A yes, gameplay loop. They made a loop where there's an actual game in here that you just don't just take pictures. You take pictures to get better equipment to take more pictures. And it definitely feeds off of the one of the main concept of Pokemon, right? Like what's Pokemon's tagline?
oh,
Got to
what?
catch them all,
Oh, that tagline. Okay, I thought you meant something like it. Yeah,
right?
okay.
So this is a gameplay loop that is definitely based on that, which in this case catching them all is taking pictures of them all. And you do that by earning points that get you better equipment and a better vehicle to find the ones you couldn't find in the first place. So there is a whole gameplay loop that feeds into the concept of catch them all, which was everything about Pokemon has been around that, right?
Mm-hmm.
From the original game into the trading card game, which was insanely popular at the time. Got to catch them all. The collectible concept of Pokemon was definitely a thing, and that was given some consideration when you play this game. For a lot of Pokemon fans, I mean, for all of you, this was the first time Pokemon were rendered in 3D. The games are 2D, and the anime and the trading cards are kind of 2D. So this would be among the first time many of the Pokemon, not all the Pokemon. I'll get to that in a second. This would be the first time that many Pokemon were rendered in 3D. And when you're a Pokemon fan, that concept is kind of exciting, you know.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you touched on that, but I think that's a really important concept to think about. That there wasn't any other, with one exception, game that allowed you to see your Pokemon in 3D. Now, it wasn't all of them. How many were the original Pokemon? 151 or something like that in the original game.
Technically, yeah,
So it's in the
151.
150s, if I'm not mistaken, and this game only features 63 of them. So it's not like you could see all the Pokemon, because at the time we only had 150, because this is still first generation before they started adding Pokemon to the list. So we got to see 63 of the original 150 Pokemon. Now, so that's part number one. For fans, it's going to be a treat because they get to see their Pokemon rendered in 3D. This was also one of the first console games ever for the Pokemon franchise. And that's why I think it's really interesting that you brought up Hey You Pikachu, because Hey You Pikachu was actually the first console game ever in the franchise. And it's really funny to me in hindsight, a concept I didn't think about until doing my research for this episode, that both these games came from the 64DD. They are both concepts that were derived from the innovation that Nintendo hoped to achieve with the 64DD, right? Because we talked about Cabbage and we talked about that virtual pet simulator and that it became Nintendogs, but I'd be very hard pressed to believe that it didn't play a role in Hey You Pikachu, which is literally a virtual pet simulator where your pet is Pikachu and you control it with a microphone, right?
Right.
It came out in December and this came out in March. So we're talking not even 3 months because of the timing between them. We're talking not even 3 months between them. I think there's a lot of merit to consider for people who don't realize, because we're spoiled nowadays, how exciting it must have been to see Pokemon in 3D if you were a fan of the series at that point. I I remember, because I was not a am not a Pokemon fan, so it was not a craze I had bought into at the time. But I remember when Hey You Pikachu and when Pokemon Snap came out, that was what people were excited for. That's the way my memory serves me, is that they were excited to see Pokemon in 3D for the first time.
Yeah, I definitely believe it.
When Snap was released, it was heavily, heavily, heavily promoted by Nintendo. I found a stat that said it was featured through the LodgeNet service, where it was featured in 86,000 hotels across the globe. For those of you that don't kind of know what that was, once upon a time, you could rent movies. I guess that's still a thing, but you could also rent video games when you were in a hotel room. They would charge it to your hotel bill. I'm sure millions of kids across the globe got themselves in trouble spending their parents' money by renting a game. But in this case, it was going to be an N64 with Pokemon Snap. You could rent that, again, 86,000 hotels across the globe.
That's crazy. I didn't actually know that.
And then let's go back to the little functionality of the Game Boy camera that didn't make it to the game, because that feature did actually live on. Nintendo partnered with a company called Lawson, a store called Lawson in Japan, and they partnered with Blockbuster here in the United States to allow people to bring their Pokemon Snap cartridges into their stores and print their photos as stickers at kiosks. So you could print your pictures as stickers. I don't remember if there was a cost involved. I forgot to look that up.
I would have
Um,
to imagine there was.
I have to imagine there was too. But think about how cool that was to be able to bring your games in and print the pictures and have them. I mean, if you're a child, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, uh, when all this is cutting edge technology and Pokemon is your favorite game in the world, I would think that was pretty freaking exciting, right?
Yeah, I agree.
They crossed Pokemon Snap into the anime just before the game was released. The main character in the Pokemon Snap game, whose name is Todd Snap, was made an appearance in the anime, so they crossed it over, which basically tells you Nintendo was heavily, heavily, heavily invested in the success of Pokemon Snap. And Hey You Pikachu, right? And it
True.
sold well.
Yeah.
It sold well enough. It sold well enough. When it released in Japan, it was the fourth ranked game on the sales chart. When it came out in the United States, it sold 150,000 copies in its first 3 days. And that earned it a spot on the top 10 list. It wasn't the top game, wasn't going to break records or anything, because I think it is a little bit of a niche title, right? But it sold well. It did incredibly well at the video store. I think that's a important point to make. Blockbuster consistently had it as the top rented title during its run. By the end of 1999, Pokemon Snap was the sixth best-selling game in the United States for the year, so it
Oh, damn.
didn't end up as a slouch in the sales chart, right?
No, not at all.
In order to achieve that, it ended up selling over 1.5 million copies. So there are copies of Pokemon Snap out in the world, no doubt.
Definitely. That's a pretty good number.
And the legacy of Pokemon Snap didn't exactly end there. It has seen a number of re releases over the years. In 2007, they re released it on the Virtual Console for the original Wii. In 2016, it was brought to the Wii U's Virtual Console. And in 2022, it was brought to the Nintendo Switch Online service if you pay for the expansion pack, which adds all the N64 games. It's part of that. So you can go back and play the original Pokemon Snap right now if you own a Switch and you pay for Nintendo Online plus its expansion. And the concept was apparently popular enough, or there was at least enough of a demand for it, that Nintendo brought the Pokemon Snap series back for a sequel in 2021 when they released New Pokemon Snap for the Nintendo Switch, right?
Right.
And New Pokemon Snap, similar plot. You're piloting, in that case, a hovercraft, and you're photographing Pokemon in their natural habitat to study ecology. They can get a little bit more elaborate with the plot nowadays. Of
Well,
course, we're what, 21 years later?
if your math checks out,
22, something like that. Video game technology has come a long, long way since then. So bigger and better, right?
indeed.
New Pokemon Snap is bigger, better. Did you play the new Pokemon Snap?
I have not played the new one, no.
Bigger levels, more realized levels. I should add many many more Pokemon. The original Pokemon Snap, like I said, has 63. The current total on new Pokemon Snap is 234.
Oh, wow.
I say current total because they've expanded it since it released. So if you have the game and you have all the updates for it, you have 234. Again, there weren't even 234 Pokemon created when the first Snap was released. A new Pokemon Snap has done well too. The first one, like I said, 1.5 million copies. The second one, 2.1 million copies. So at least the series is pretty consistent in terms of people's interest. There's not a lot of difference nowadays between that. So,
No, I
but
mean, it sold more than the original, so that's pretty good.
I don't know if the game itself has really made a dent in video game history. What it serves as is a really interesting concept, a footnote, I think, to the 64DD. Another way in which we know that the technology and ideas that came out of that platform were utilized, like Nintendogs, like Animal Crossing, and now like Pokemon Snap, right? I think it is a very telling sign of a very unique part in history when Pokemon Fad was just getting going and they were looking at capitalizing it. I don't think it makes sense if you don't know its backstory, though, right? Because in all honesty, before I knew its backstory, I wanted to know who the heck had an idea to take pictures of Pokemon. Like, where the hell did that come from?
Yeah, definitely. It is not what I would have thought would been a good game, but
No, but
people
when
play it.
people do play it, but when you realize that it was a concept that was long worked on in a different environment, and Pokemon was just kind of the glue that brought it all together, so to speak, it makes a little more sense. Um, it makes a lot more sense actually. So that is one of the unique games in Pokemon history. One of the spin-offs, early spin-offs, the second Pokemon console game ever, and that's Pokemon Snap, Rob.
That it is.
it's a it, I, People like it. That's all I can say. People like it. It's got to be interesting. Not for me though. We know that Pokemon's not for me. We already know that too. Oh well.
It sucks because it hit on 50% you, 50% me. If we were the same person, it would have
True.
worked out because you got the
That's
photography, I got the Pokemon. You put those two together.
What's funny is the it exists in a genre called the photography genre, and I debated angling this episode from that because how many examples am I ever going to get to talk about the photography genre in video games, right?
I'd
Um,
be shocked to know there was more than one.
well, we've done another one because games that are in the photography genre tend to overlap with other genres. There's not many games that are just dedicated just to taking photos. Like Dead Rising, for instance, is part of the photography genre, right? Because in that game, you're a photojournalist and you take pictures.
Yeah, and I forgot all about that.
Yeah, and so like the photography genre kind of also includes the concept of how taking photos and photo modes have been added to games retrospectively. Now that's a thing for games. So that genre has kind of evolved, but yeah, started Apple. There's an Apple II game around taking pictures, so it started a long time ago. All right. Well, with that being said, I think that'll do it for Pokemon Snap. There are a lot of other interesting concepts that we touched today. The 64DD is a bigger story with some more to it. There are more games to talk about in 64DD, get into some of the technical specs. And of course, we have that on an older episode that you can check out by going to our archives. And of course, you can do that by going to our website, www.memorycardlane.com. Rob, what else can people do on our website?
You can find a calendar of our upcoming episode topics. You can find a link to our Discord server where you can come chat with Dave and I about some topics, whatever you might think. You can find links to our Patreon where you can help support us, get access to ad free and unedited versions of our episodes. And you can find links to our social media where I am on several platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David is wrong. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, platform, console, technology. I always like to say I did one on a museum once. So if I find it relevant to this current week in gaming history, bam, topic. And one of the best parts about doing this week in, week out is every week when I sit down to do more research and write new episodes, I learn things and I get excited by this concept of teaching and learning and teaching. I love learning new things and I love teaching other people new things. So, in celebration of said cycle, we always like to go roundtable and talk about what we've taken away each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
I learned a lot more about Pokemon Snap than I ever knew before. I didn't know that you could use the camera or the printer rather for the Game Boy camera to do printing pictures. Um, I
Well,
didn't.
take it into the kiosk.
Well, right, but even that they had considered using. I mean, honestly, I forget the Game Boy printers were a thing. So it's just always a nice little reminder on that one. Um, and I think it's interesting that this all stemmed from Jack and Beans.
Right?
Who knew such a crazy concept could just turn into Pokemon Snap? It's Jack and the Beanstalk, and now suddenly we're taking pictures of pocket monsters.
And Jack and Beans is people. They're not like a nobody. That's got like Iwata and Itoi and like a lot of that group, are the guys that kind of worked on this. Miyamoto worked on this. It was a whole deal, which is really interesting. So
No, absolutely. It's overall just a really cool thing. So that's it for me. What about yourself?
I think most of all, I really liked the realization that both these games, Snap and Hey You Pikachu, were just extensions of the DD. We've learned about Nintendogs and Animal Crossing, and I know there's other games mixed in there, but I never really put it together that these two were also extensions of all that innovation that they were trying to cultivate, for that platform. And I think I like pedigree. I like learning about where things come from. For anyone who's listened to this podcast, they know I like cause and effect, putting it together like that. And so coming to the realization that Snap and Hey You Pikachu were DD concepts, to me, at least I would think they're DD concepts. I really enjoyed that for sure. So
Yeah, I would agree that they are. It makes sense when you think about everything, and it is pretty cool to think about.
All right, Rob. Well, before I take it out of here and into next week, is there anything else you'd like to add to today's episode?
I'll just take a quick moment to say thank you so much to our listeners. It means the world to have you along as we learn about different concepts, games, and things, sometimes taking pictures of Pokemon. So thank you.
Thank you indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our photographic safari through Pokemon Snap. This, I'd say, two of a kind game showed us the joy of capturing Pokemon in their natural habitats, turning observation into art. As you venture into New World, camera in hand, remember the magic of seeing familiar things from a new perspective. Next week, we are trading the peaceful photography of Pokemon Snap for the magic and mystery of Kingdom Hearts. Released in 2002, this groundbreaking collaboration between Square Enix and Disney invited players to journey through enchanting worlds, battle the Heartless, and team up with iconic characters from both universes. So join us as we explore the origins of this epic crossover and uncover why wielding a keyplane is the ultimate Disney dream on next week's magical trip down memory card lane.
Skibidi bop 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 doo